So we're back for another episode. Um, this one's going to be about the myths of Satchel Paige and Cy Young. It's very abstract, kind of almost metaphysical thing to talk about here, um, because what defines both of these figures in baseball history to me is absence. It's not presence, whether that's of statistics, of knowledge. Satchel Paige is defined by story. And a lot of the story around Satchel Paige that constitutes the myth and the figure of Satchel Paige is stories that he tells himself or stories that are told about him, right? In the constellating mythology of the Negro Leagues and of early baseball. And Cy Young is kind of complementary to this because his story is one that is balanced on the precipice of the pre-modern era of baseball and the modern era of baseball. I mean, this is a guy who plays with Addie Joss at the end of his career, um, experiences the first modern World Series, right? Throws the first pitch in the first World Series, but also lives in and embodies this time of pre-modern baseball where there was no image. And so, really, what we're talking about with Cy Young and Satchel Paige is this open field of imagery that they become kind of mythological gods or scriptures within the greater canon of baseball history, precisely because so little is known or can be known about them. And this information age that we're in, right? This kind of goes back to my last video. This information age that we're in is an age of technology and industry. And when you look at the period of 1910 onward, 1909, 1908 onward, the modernization of baseball has to do with a transparency of baseball. And what I mean by transparency is an opening or a window through which the game itself can be perceived and the narratives become more and more clarified. This is kind of something similar that you see with social media, news media, moving images when it comes to television and things of that like. You have an aperture that opens, and by aperture I mean lens, to perceive history, document history, and record it. That Satchel Paige and Cy Young, for two different reasons, balance on the precipice of. Satchel Paige because it's the Negro Leagues archives are so difficult to access. There's so little information compared even to early baseball history. Because it's so diffuse. The movements that spring up and occur within it are so diffuse, other than the sort of major teams and the major historical moments. Even then, right, very, very little is known other than oral history, right? So this gets me to the aspect of modernity that's so important that baseball embodies on its very precipice. It is documentation. So a lot of what people who are collectors or archivists or historians all kind of orbit around is the documentation of early baseball history that can be accessed, accumulated, stored, archived, etc., etc. So the things that remain are archival scraps. That's documentation, that's letters, that's, I don't know, you could even say uniforms or bats, those things. But what constitutes our memory of history are the artifacts through which we can perceive it. Those artifacts themselves are kind of apertures, right? They're lenses through which we can perceive the past, beyond just like an oral tradition, right? So a lot of what baseball history, especially early baseball history, constitutes are artifacts through which we can perceive, whether that's a photo, whether that's a letter, whether that's a document. And what makes Cy Young and Satchel Paige as very, very, very important kind of archetypal figureheads of this process is that we are trying to piece together an understanding of these essential baseball figures, right? Two of the best pitchers to ever live, kind of bar none, both of which had a monumental impact on baseball itself. We're trying to perceive them, understand them, know them, but it's precisely because of the lack of knowledge and information that they become mythological or legendary, right? I mean, obviously, the statistics, I think, speak for themselves for both players, but this is a lot of what I think is so intriguing about early baseball history, is that so little is known and can be known because there are limitations. There's limitations of documentation, I would say, primarily. Even through the lenses of photography, through baseball cards, through letters, through newspapers, magazines, etc., we are attempting to reconstitute an entire landscape, an ecosystem of a reality, right? Of the existence of this very, very firm environment that was in the process of rapid change, right? Especially from 1900 to 1920, or for my purposes, 1909 to 1916. It was an ecosystem undergoing a rapid state of change, that even if we were to capture it, let's say through a series of photographs or cards or documents that gave us what we could suppose to be a strong amount of insight, we would still be missing valuable critical information. And that's what's so illuminating to me about this process of recall, right? Because this is a collective archetypal mythology that exists very firmly in history, but we are reconstituting it through memory, right? Whether that's stories that have been told, whether that's remaining documentation and artifacts that can be pieced back together. They're fragments, right? They're almost like runoff of the essential historical event. And that process is always necessarily incomplete because that time itself can never be fully recovered. This is, to me, what characterizes the myth and the legend of Young and Satchel Paige in particular. If you take figures from the Golden Age, let's say Lou Gehrig or Babe Ruth isn't so good of an example because his childhood is hard to totally understand, right? There's a lot of rapid, significant, extreme transformation that occurs in his childhood that isn't fully documented or known as well. But someone like Lou Gehrig, or I think is a good example, or Stan Musial or Mickey Mantle, these people, even Gehrig is a good example because even he grows up in an age where there is a sort of public archive of information, and his history can be readily identified and constituted and at least understood in terms of a narrative timeline. You can kind of create an architecture of how Lou Gehrig came to be Lou Gehrig. Whereas with Satchel Paige, specifically because of where he grew up as well, in the Deep South, it was hard, I believe, to even know how old he was, right? His age was always in dispute. He would just be called this or that. It was kind of a running joke. It was hard to know about his childhood because we're talking about a period of time of American history where so much was in the dark and so much was in the process of changing. A lot of things escaped narrativization, and a lot of things escaped information technology. And obviously, we live in a different time now. This kind of hyper modern, like surveillance technology, everything's documented, archived, cataloged. The internet, personal technology devices. This is not Satchel Paige is coming from a very different period of time and place, right? I mean, let's say we're talking about the 30s in New York City is going to be very different than the 1910s or even 20s in the Deep South of the United States. This is a period of time that history has not conquered and could not conquer, in the sense that it could not be remembered or archived or cataloged. And what little was archived and cataloged, I think, is highly disputed or disputable, especially in regards to the Negro Leagues, which is really powerful because this, to me, suggests that recovery work is near impossible, but it's something that's worth doing because we can piece together from this darkness of history a cohesive, comprehensive, like understanding, or a something resembling a map to a period of time which otherwise is totally lost to us. So I think, for example, right, I mean, this would include Cy Young, is that I have a 1910 Boston Red Sox Huntington Grounds ticket. It's like a fragment that was pulled from a scrapbook, and it's in one of my earlier videos, and it's just like a fragment. It's like a chip or a shard. I called it like potsherd, right? And I was talking about this concept of ostraca, remnants or pottery shards that were used as writing surfaces. They were repurposed, and some of those are some of the only historical memory we have of entire civilizations. Egypt in particular, it's one of the more powerful remnants that we have of Egypt to understand the contemporary everyday culture, right? At least. These fragments, where I'm talking about deadball era history and this moment in time in American history as a sort of lost civilization. And what we're doing, or with press photography or cards or documents, is reconstituting something that is so little understood, right? I would say that even the best baseball historians of this time period are still very in the dark as to what happened, why, and the full picture, right? The full scope or the full world of this unfolding, precisely because it happened at the crux of modernity, which is the crux between kind of agrarian information's being exchanged through like weekly Harper's things. It's an accelerating modernity, but the archives themselves they exist as kind of a surface level narrative right now. It's a sort of a timeline that's been constituted, and there's a accepted, agreed upon timeline behind which, or under which, there's this massive tectonic plates that are shifting culturally, socially, economically, politically in America, and the personal stories which are threaded sort of as root systems underneath what we perceive on the surface to be deadball era America. So there's a lot there. And to return kind of to Cy Young and Satchel Paige, because I don't want to lose that essential thread, because these two figures to me represent exactly what it means to recover this period of time. Cy Young himself is the world figure of baseball. The Cy Young Award, I think, is the perfect example. He's ubiquitous and yet entirely unknown. Right? This is a man who existed straddling the modern world. And Satchel Paige as well, obviously from essentially a different era, right? He's born even as Cy Young's career is ending. He as well symbolizes this darkness from which our cohesive understanding of baseball and American history emerges. I think there's this idea that we would like to have, that we understand even 100 years ago what was going on, what was happening, and why. But I think the lack of information is just so in our faces, right? I mean, beyond the newspaper scraps, right? The photos, having a real constituted understanding of that ecosystem is a lot of what I think my work is about, and trying to understand the figures and forces at work there. So Cy Young and Satchel Paige are kind of like an entryway for me into this sphere of thought, because there's a lot of, I just think a lot of beauty that's there to be illuminated. And in order to do so, we are working with fragments, right? It's almost like the bones of history, or you're like excavating a archaeological site in many ways. And you're doing that through media documents, media objects, media instruments, to understand, cultivate, and create a better and deeper understanding of exactly what was happening and why. Um, so that to me is kind of the importance and the beauty and the mystery, the strangeness of the Deadball era. Um, so you see this shift right through Cy Young and then Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige is almost like the beginnings of an illumination, moving from kind of an oral history into a religiously documented information technology era ecosystem of history. Um, what you see is there's this emergence from fragmentation into this idea that all of the information is readily accessible and constituted. Right, there's these archives, whether it's baseball reference or whether you want to talk about biographies or documentaries or lots of primary sources rapidly accelerating over the past 100 years. And you lose this element of the recovery of history, right? Or this idea of the importance of the recovery of history, even the mystique of the archaeology that comes with the recovery of history, because the transparency is so one-to-one, especially with video technology, right? You get this increased hyper-modern transparency of information, materials, documents. So you have this belief that you understand, or at least you have this belief that you understand the constituted history that's being presented to you in media form. But with the Deadball era, and I think Satchel Paige is one of the last real remnants of that archaeological myth, you don't have it, and I think the idea is realistically you never will. But you will have a tapestry or a mosaic or it's like the stained glass windows, right, where there's these different fragments of shattered glass through which you can perceive the looking back through the light of history. Something almost Walter Benjamin-esque about that, and I'll explain what that is. It's like Walter Benjamin has a metaphor called the angel of history. The angel of history is looking back even as it is moving through the ruins, which are history being constituted in like a past tense, right? Ruins of civilization. And so there's an archaeological dig there. There's like a resurrection process of bringing light to a very complex, compound, and kind of multiplicitous historical ground, right? There's such a rich ground of the Deadball era. It's almost like a rich soil that's kind of the bedrock or the fertile essence through which the entire, or you could say fertile crescent of the entirety of baseball history as it springs up. And so I really look at that as a foundation of modernity. You can see a lot of America through it, as well as a lot of the changes that are happening in humanity at the time through that lens. So I think that sums up this episode. It's like a riff, right? You're kind of using this as an entryway into something deeper. So good talking with you. I'll see you on the next one.